All right, yes, welcome to our talk today about data mesh governance. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about this topic. It's again a topic dear to my heart. I had it last year. I talked about cost efficiency. This year I'm going to talk about data mesh because from a business perspective, I think that's a great chance for many companies out there to really become more efficient in working with data and really become data-driven, focusing on the business. So I'm really looking forward to this one. This year I'm not going to do this alone. I have an actual technical expert with me, Marc.
Hey, my name is Marc. I'm basically in a relationship with Scalefree since 2016. At least my wife says so.
Yeah.
And so since then I'm doing a lot of data vault projects and did this data mesh thing already before it really became a topic or it became the term data mesh, right? Mm-hmm. Because what we see basically is a natural behavior that as soon as your organization grows or the projects grow, that you have to decentralize anyway. But what we want to do today is to compare the concept, the theoretical concept of data mesh with what we see and what we did in the real world and what works really well. So.
All right, so let's get started. The agenda. So we're going to talk quick about data mesh. So we hope you all kind of know already what data mesh is, because we only have 25 minutes or so. So we can't do like our only data mesh presentation, then the 25 minutes are over. Then we're going to talk quick about why data governance matters. Then we're going to dive in the best practices. We have two parts here. The first one focuses more on the data architecture and how to slice in a data mesh, and also about establishing the cross-functional teams that are needed in a data mesh. And then a really short conclusion.
All right, but first let's talk about very briefly, I promised just one slide about what data mesh is for a recap. So data mesh is basically a decentralized approach with a centralized support, so that we have a centralized platform, centralized rules and so on. And data mesh is based on 4 pillars, and the first one is domain ownership. So that means we have a lot of domains which are responsible for their data products. And if I compare data domain or domain ownership, for example, with Scalefree, so we have, for example, we do trainings, we do consulting, we do events like this here, right? And basically the domains are already defined based on your operational processes, right? So, and this is what, each domain now is responsible for producing their data products and maintain them and provide them for analytical users, for data scientists, business users, that they can use the data as a product. And here, referencing to Lukas and Martin, what they said, you need to be, or those data products need to be really well defined and according to the business that the people can using, for example, data catalog and really know, okay, in this data product, I will find this and this and this data, and I can use it. So, and that they don't do it somehow and somewhere, it's basically good to have a centralized platform, right? A managed platform, a governed platform, where security policies or security is applied, where we have a DevOps team which take care of making good releases, that you can maybe have CI/CD processes and so on. And of course, everything needs to be governed as mentioned, so we need standards and governance to really make this whole thing like an old machine, right? And
All right, so why data governance matters. So if you Google data governance, you will find something like focuses on availability, usability, consistency, data integrity, data security, and standard compliance. So a lot of things. So it's already complicated. And now you start a data mesh. That means a lot of teams working in parallel, probably with the same data, makes everything a little bit more complicated. So it's going to be a few challenges that you need to focus on. The first one is standards become key. You can't expect the teams to work in the same way if you don't give them the guides to do so, right? So you're gonna need a process standard guide, general guide, frameworks, etc. to make sure that the products in the end are actually compatible to each other. So you can actually work with them and combine them. You also need transparency. Obviously, you don't want people to build the same thing twice or thrice or more and more and more and more. But you can only achieve that if you actually have a transparent data platform, right? And you have to give them a tool to search through the available data products, which are well defined, etc., etc. You also need to be able to actually share the data. So you need technology that works with that. You need to somehow establish really efficiently the contracts between different domains to share this data. It needs to be an efficient process, needs to be automated. Also, you're going to have the big challenge of collaboration. We talked about that today already a bit. You have traditionally IT teams. And in a domain-driven approach, you get developers and push them to the business. That actually makes them to talk more to the business, which is great. But obviously there will be challenges, organizational challenges to make that happen. It won't be a smooth ride, but it's really worth it to get there.
All right, let's have a look on how to apply now this domain ownership to an architecture. So here we have an architecture in place. I think it looks very familiar to the most of you, right? So we have kind of a staging area first where we absorb the data from the sources. Then we have the next layer where we integrate the data and applying a modeling technique, whether it's data vault or any other modeling technique, doesn't matter. And then we have this information delivery phase, or this layer where we present the data to the business users. And this is basically what the data products at the end are, right? So we have product, we have product customer, for example, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. And the original concept from the data mesh concept defined by Marc is talking about completely decentralizing these processes, right? So that each domain is responsible from the very first to the very end of the data. So that would mean that each domain would end up in something like this. And this reminds me a little bit of having these data silos again, right? So these, of course, this time very well governed, so way more standards and so on, right? So that it works and that the data products are have a bit more value, or have a lot of more value. But at the end, they still will end up in something like this, right? So they will absorb the data, model it, and present it in a data product. So and our idea was, or what we see is how to, where it makes sense to split, right? So in the data consumption area, for example, that's where the business users are sitting on the right side. So they are usually split by domains anyway, right? So that's what I said. For Scalefree, we had the consulting team there, we had the events team there, a marketing team, for example, there, right? And they're already split. But how far you would split the data to the very beginning if we still think about these also a centralized approach? Because this is our, let's say, what we saw works very well, that you start at the very beginning in a more centralized approach. You maybe have a small team, right, doing the first proof of concepts, they start building something, and they do it more in a centralized way, right? But then the organization grows, the project grows, more and more people are involved in that, and then you start decentralizing. And here I would like to show you how a split, or what we saw a split really makes sense. And this is the point as soon as you start interpreting the data. Right? So as you can see, the staging area and the enterprise data warehouse until the raw data vault is still more centralized, because we see it makes sense that we don't have that much redundant work, because for sure domain 1 and domain 2, they most likely need the same objects. For example, our event team and our trainings team, they both need, for example, the entity accounts from our Salesforce system. Right? If they do a completely decentralized approach, they would model it twice. They would stage it twice, model it twice, right? Which is, maybe they have different definitions of the same object. That's what we saw in the previous presentation, right? And that's fine, but until the raw vault, we just want to implement it once. That's also what we saw in the previous presentation, where we just had one customer hub, right? And not two customer hubs, right? So, and that's where we think it still makes sense to centralize to some extent, right? And it can make sense to do it just until the raw vault. It can also make sense to also decentralize already the raw vault if we're thinking on really big organizations. And this is what we're going to talk about right now. So centralization in staging area and the raw data vault. So it also makes sense because we have a really high level of automation, right? So a lot of automation tools are in place. A lot of them are here today and tomorrow, right? So that means with almost no business logic, of course you need to understand the business terminology, right? So how to, what is the business key of something, of an object, and how to integrate the data properly into the data warehouse. But that's basically it, right? So you don't need all the KPI definitions and all the different definitions until the raw vault yet, right? So you can do it very automated, very efficiently, and you prevent redundant work, right? As when you centralize everything onto the raw vault. And of course, there are limits to this approach. If we think about really, really big organizations, if we have a really huge team in China, in the US, in Europe, right? I think you don't want to have one big raw vault, right? So they will most likely have different raw vaults and have their own data warehouses in place, right? So there are always limits, of course, but we think it still makes sense for, let's say, normal sized projects, and these are the projects where at least I was in so far, that we still saw benefits in centralizing until a point where it really makes sense, like the raw vault, and then starting really decentralizing, starting from the business vault, because this is where the business knowledge is really necessary. Here you need the teams, and also I really like the sentence from Lucas that please talk to the business, right? So please bring business and IT more together. So it's there's I think no sense anymore to really split these two teams, say, hey, this is IT team, this is the business team. Of course, you have these. For example, one part of the data mesh concept is the platform team. This is always in the background, right? This is more what I really think is an IT team, right? Taking care of security and so on. But when we talk about data and analyzing data, the data engineers and the business users should work closely together. And yeah, you have clear ownership, and and it scales really efficiently. And that's also the main advantage of data mesh, that you can scale out really quickly by having this decentralized approach. And this should be the minimum, right? So as soon, and data vault, this fits very well because you have the split of raw vault, business vault, and as soon as you start with the business vault, this should definitely the minimum where you should start decentralizing your ownerships here. And yeah.
All right. Thank you, Marc. Okay. All right. So what are the needed pieces in the end for working data mesh? There's multiple points here. It's not a particular order. There's no priority behind them, but I will go through piece by piece. The first one is standardized DevOps. And that's something people often forget. They focus on the creation of new data products, etc. But if you want to work in a standardized, governed platform with multiple domain teams, maybe in the end 30, 40, 50 domain teams, it's really important to have a standardized DevOps that integrates everything. If you, for example, have a data catalog and obviously your data product, you want it to be synced, like all the time, obviously. You don't want anyone manually going there, checking it every day, updating it. You all know it, documentation, if it's not automated, it's gonna be a problem. But it's also about the whole pipeline, how they work, right? In the best case, for one client, we had infrastructure as code. That made it quite easy. If a new domain team comes in, they have to type in, these are my people in the domain team, those are the roles, and then we can do the rest automatically to set up, for example, the whole Git environment, the dev environments, the test environment, the pipeline, even the tests already, the standard tests that you want everyone to do. You can put it in there, so you can actually make sure that they actually do it, right? So this one is important. The second one is a governed platform. So obviously, out there are a lot of platforms in a big company. There's different technology that's used. But something that can help at least a lot is if people use the same technology in the company until it makes sense. There's always use cases, okay, we need this technology to serve this use case. That is fine. But you have to make sure that the platform team actually governs that as well. Because if you don't, then you lose the control again, and then it's going to get more complicated, especially for the collaboration of the data products. Automation. So we talk about we can, it's right, our bold statement here, we can centralize the staging in the raw vault because we're not going to be a bottleneck. That's the main point of it, because we can automate it. If you can't, then you're going to be a bottleneck. Then it doesn't make sense and it won't work, because then you're back at where you were, that everything is bottlenecked in IT, people talking to each other, not happy, prioritization doesn't work, etc., etc. Sorry. And you don't go forward. So you have to be able to automate those parts. And even in robot modeling, there's going to be new tools out there, or there are tools out there that can help you there as well. So we say you can be really, really efficient in the first layers to make sure that you're not a bottleneck. Data catalog. Obviously, you need one. If you want people to know which products are out there, work with them, integrate with them, etc., you have to have a search functionality for those things, and then obviously a really, really well-defined documentation, which of course should be standardized as well, right? So we have the lineage here. Where's the data coming from? What does it mean, right? If you don't have that and you can't trust the product because you don't understand it, you can't use it, right? So that needs to be there. The federated governance is a big point. So that's a big change, because the governance is not made by IT head X, but it's made by the heads of the domains, right? Because they are the ones that are creating value. Those are the ones who know the business. And those are the ones who should also come together and talk about these things, how you want to govern this platform. Releases. That's something people don't really think about when they think about data. But we talk now about data products. We talk about one platform with functionalities, etc. That changes things. And if you have like 20, 30 domain teams, and maybe you have a new functionality that, I don't know, your database has Snowflake added something new, right? Those guys don't read the release notes of all the tools that are maybe really important to them, right? Who does that? Maybe some people, but most people don't. Maybe you created really, really great data products that you know everyone can benefit from, or a lot of different domains can benefit from. You can put that in releases. You can say, my product, my data environment has this new in the last 3 months, we had these new functionalities, those new data products, check it out here. Quickly, transparent, show it to the domain teams. It will help them to work better with the data. And of course, to put it all together, that it actually works, you need those standard guides, and you need them early to make sure that the teams adhere to the standards. Because you want collaboration, you want to integrate, you need standards, otherwise it won't work. All right?
Yeah. Maybe a funny side story to that. Yeah. And the last few months I was in a project, or still am in a project, where where a company bought another company, and we had to migrate all the data into an already existing data warehouse. And this worked really, really well. We were really fast, could do it in just in a few months. The most effort we spent in those objects were the naming conventions were not applied. So we couldn't automate these parts, and we had to manually do it and find, so hey, where does this data belongs to and where does this data belongs to? And yeah, so therefore, really important to stick also to standards and define them as soon as possible, that you build it up, and then you can really, the point automation works then really well. There's so much opportunities to do things better. All right, but let's have a look on how to get there, right? So how to get to these functional teams. As I basically already explained it somehow, that we start building up a platform first, right? So we need the technology stack, we need that's usually the point where you have an internal team, where you have, where you do proof of concepts, and you define the platform with the tool stack and so on. So then you have the first use cases, and that's the point where you still have more centralized team, right? So you have this centralized IT team building the first use cases, so push the data through all the layers from the staging until the information map to produce something very quickly. And then usually what happens is, hey, customers are satisfied, they want to have more requirements, your team grows, and that's usually the point where you need to be able to scale as well. And this is where you usually distribute the your data engineers, which were part at the very beginning in a central team, in a central IT team, and split them into the data domains, right? So that they work closely together with the business. And then you have these cross-functional teams, basically. So let's have a look on how this looks like on again on the architecture. So you can see the guys with the blue hats. So this is the central IT team, or this is the centralized team, and this is how it could start, right? So you can see that the blue guys are in each layer, right? So you have the staging, the enterprise data warehouse, and the information delivery layer, and this is until the point where you do the first deliveries, right? And you see already the guys with the orange hats. So these are the domain teams. So this is where basically the the business knowledge is in. You can see them partially also in the metadata management. You can see them in the data products that they define the data products. But for the first throughputs, you let them do it by the central IT team, that those guys can get familiar with everything, right? So usually they work in a new environment, with new technology, new team members and so on, right? So we think it's good to, or what we saw, what works very well, that they get familiar with all these things, setting up naming conventions and so on. And then over time, you move to this, right? So what you see first is that the business world becomes bigger, because this is what happens automatically as well, that as soon as your project evolves, you really, so after 1 year in a project, I can really not remember when I worked last time in a raw void, right? So I basically just work in the business world, because new requirements, for new requirements, the data is usually already there, or to a very big amount, to a very big extent, it's already there. So that means the most effort is in the business world as well. And the guys with the blue hats now moved into the data domain teams, and they can really good support them by building their data products and still knowing all these rules they defined up front in the past few weeks or months, right? But also here you still see some blue people here in the raw void and in the staging area, and that's what we said, where we think it still makes sense to have some centralized points, right? And they're therefore supporting you for if you need some completely new data that you don't have, that the domain teams don't have to do the staging jobs on their own, for example. Of course, until the point where it doesn't become a bottleneck, right? So if the orange people grow heavily, right, so that the blue teams cannot do it anymore, of course, then it makes sense to also decentralize the previous parts as well. But
okay, yes, there's always the famous "it depends," right? But obviously, we can't talk about a company size from 5 people to hundreds, thousands of people, right? So this, what we talk about here, is a really good starting point, about which we know it works really well. So what would be the steps that you need to do to get to the first domain team, etc., right? So the first part is you have to decide on fitting technology. I talked a lot about requirements. Not every piece of technology can do that. So you maybe need to get additional technology, and maybe even change something if you're on really old technology that maybe doesn't fit in that. But obviously, it really depends on the structure of what you already have there. But you need technology that makes it happen, because if you don't, your data mesh will be really, really inefficient and won't work. You need to define the teams. How should your cross-functional team look like in the long term? That can change with time. We talked about in the beginning, it can be in the central, but you need a plan when they move to the domains. And when we talk move to the domains, we don't mean they still have the boss in the IT. It changes, right? Their head will be from business. They will be part of that product. They will focus on that. They will become better in their product, much better. And they will build their own products. You find a reach. So we talked about our best practice implementation of how far we think you should go in let's say in a data mesh which doesn't produce redundant data, because in the beginning we created in centralized. The data products shouldn't be redundant because we have a data catalog with the well-defined products, and that becomes overall really efficient. However, we also said it depends, right, on your company size, etc. Then you need to create the guides. Start with the basic ones in the beginning. Naming convention should be there as soon as possible. It takes a few hours. You have templates. I think even in our knowledge hub we have something you can just pull. Do that in the beginning, otherwise you have a big problem later on. Like his example, think about it. It's like 2 major companies coming together, one reporting, even for external, for the government, in 2 or 3 months. And half of that work is just because the naming conventions didn't fit. So think about that, the big difference of the few hours in the beginning. And if you have that, you can start onboarding with the first domain teams, do it piece by piece. You can't just transform your whole company with a big bang approach. That will fail for sure, right? So you have to go there piece by piece. All right, so to come already to our short conclusion, starting a data mesh without a clear governance strategy will result in anarchy and data silos, which hinders collaboration, is inefficient, and will be non-compliant with internal and probably also external guidelines, which you don't want to have. So make sure to do it right and not just because you want to be data mesh. So you start something, think about it first, and then do it the right way. Thank you very much. All right. We are not already out of time. We still had time for 1-2 questions, if there are any, of course. Yeah. Okay.
So, if I understand this correctly, you want to split the remote concept hubs into new hubs in the business world. Is that correct?
No. Like in the raw world, if you talk about a customer concept, it would be one hub in the raw world. From the source system, it's the ID, right? It's a business key. There's going to be one hub. And then the different domains, if they have different interpretations of these things, if they want to filter it down, like Lukas said, basically, they can. Because now they can build a data product on top of that. They can filter down. They can create a data product, call it retail customers, define it as a data product, and can share it. But they can do it on their own. They have access to the raw world. They can pull it. They can put the business logic on it.
Yeah, but do they create a new hub in the business world for that? Or do they do it in the automation or information layer?
I mean, doing it in the business world could be an option, right? So to create, for example, a virtualized business hub on that only stores the keys who you define as prospects, for example. Or you can also do it in a data product directly where you usually need to divide between, if we stick to the customer example, between prospects and customers. But this is somewhere handled or shown in the descriptive data usually, right? A type flag or whatever it is, right? And this can be filtered on the data products as well, right? So how you do it in the business world or doing it in the information world, this is a lot of other topics come into place, like performance, for example, and so on. But for the raw world, that's important, right? So we have, first of all, as we saw before, this one customer hub, or if it even makes sense, a party hub, right? So that's the definition of business keys then, right?
But think about a great thing. Now the domain they own it, right? So they can decide, all right, let's do it in a business world, for example, with the virtualized hub, with the keys they need, because they need it for multiple products in the end. So they can maybe build it there already to use it in information mart for multiple products, which can make sure that even in their domain, neglect redundant data, right? So, but at the end, it's their choice. They can see it and they can use it how it fits best for their products, which they are responsible for. Right. Okay.
So, in your opinion, can you have a successful data mesh implementation without data vault? And is it an all or nothing situation? Because I work on a very large data mesh implementation where 90% of the teams will not follow data vault, at least not now, or they've not even heard of data vault. So, is it something you can start small and grow? Is it an all or nothing approach?
I mean, in my opinion, absolutely yes, but it makes things more complicated because we have the great separation of the raw world, which is one single truth of facts that everyone can use, and then put a business logic on top. If you have the core on top of the data lake, and that takes more time to adapt, etc., it can be more complicated, and then the question comes, where do you slice, right? That depends. We actually discussed this, so we're not 100% sure where to slice as a best practice, if it would be in the core or in the information mart, right? So if you do it, then again, it's the same argument. If you do it in the core, you maybe have the redundant models. If you don't, you're going to have a bottleneck because the core takes time, especially in refactoring. So there, it really depends on the situation, but you can actually, you definitely can make it work. Right? We would obviously recommend in data vault because it's perfect for it, but you can definitely make it work as well with a traditional approach, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe Marc wants to add something.
Yeah, of course. I think data vault provides us with the concept of raw vault and business vault. It works very well. But of course, you can also apply this concept to non-data vault modeling techniques, right? So you can already store even if you use the third normal form, store the raw data first in a customer table and then have an additional layer for only the business logic, where you start splitting up the data domains, or starting with the domain ownerships.
So you're simulating a data vault in that way?
Sorry again?
You're simulating a data vault implementation that way?
Only a small piece of it. Why not?
So we've run out of time for the Q&A session, so here comes the next networking break, so you have half an hour.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.